The palace of Thalos was a monument of silence, and in that endless stillness, Lysander walked alone. His silk robe whispered across the floor, embroidered with the crest of two kingdoms that had once been enemies, the dragon of Thalos and the moonflower of Varen, symbols of peace and a marriage forged in chains. He paused at the grand mirror in the corridor. His reflection looked almost ghostly, long silver hair braided neatly, pale skin touched by candlelight, eyes of soft violet that never quite sparkled anymore. An Omega prince turned queen consort, and yet he had never once been touched by his husband. 10 years. 10 winters and 10 springs since his wedding to the Alpha King Alaric Thalos. 10 years of the same chambers, the same silence, the same polite distance. Tonight marked their 10th anniversary. The court prepared a banquet to celebrate the enduring alliance, but Lysander knew better. He was a symbol, beautiful, untouchable, and utterly alone. He had stood beside Alaric before the nobles that evening, smiling as expected, wearing the heavy golden crown that ached against his temples. The king had not looked at him even once. As the festivities ended, Lysander dismissed his attendants and walked back toward his empty chambers. Snow had begun to fall, soft, endless flakes that drifted through the open arches of the corridor. He touched the cold stone of the wall, whispering quietly, almost to himself, 10 years, and I still can't forget the warmth of your hand from our wedding day. Behind him, the distant footsteps of guards echoed, but another pair of steps followed slower, quieter, heavier. He froze. That scent, faint but unmistakable, the deep smoky scent of cedar and rain, the Alpha King. Lysander's heart trembled violently in his chest. He didn't turn around. He'd learned not to hope. Every time he looked, he was met with distance. The steps halted a few paces away, a long silence. Then, that low, rough voice that Lysander had both longed for and dreaded for a decade. You shouldn't walk these halls alone at night. The tone was flat, but beneath it, something unsteady. Lysander turned, bowing lightly. Your Majesty, he whispered, his voice as soft as silk. Forgive me. I didn't wish to disturb your solitude. Their eyes met. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The golden of Alaric's gaze burned like a dying fire, restrained, aching. Lysander had seen that look before, once, on their wedding night, before it vanished behind walls of iron. Alaric's gloved hand tightened at his side. His body was tense, every muscle rigid. He looked as if a single touch would break him. And then he said quietly, It's late, you should rest. He turned away. The king's cloak brushed past him, smelling faintly of battle and rain. Lysander watched him leave, heart twisting painfully. 10 years, and even now, Alaric still stood just close enough to hurt him, and just far enough to make him ache forever. That night, as he lay in the vast empty bed of the royal suite, Lysander pressed a trembling hand over his chest. Do you hate me that much, Alaric? He whispered into the darkness. Outside, the snow fell harder, and somewhere beyond the walls, the Alpha King stood alone on his balcony, watching the same falling snow, his jaw tight, his eyes haunted. If I touch you, I'll lose you, Alaric murmured to the wind. And that I cannot bear. The next morning, the palace was abuzz with news. The royal astrologers had declared the coming of a blood moon, a celestial event that appeared only once every century. In ancient lore, it was said to stir the instincts of all alphas, heightening their desires and shattering restraints. To Alaric, it was a warning. To Lysander, it meant nothing at first, only that the king seemed to avoid him even more as the day drew near. Meanwhile, in the royal war room, Alaric stood with his commander Elias, his expression grim. You know what the oracle said, Elias murmured. If you resist the bond any longer, the curse will consume you both. Alaric's golden eyes hardened. If I claim him, he dies. Elias bowed his head, voice low. Then the gods are cruel indeed. That night, Lysander sat by his window, watching the red hue begin to stain the horizon. The blood moon was rising. A strange heat prickled beneath his skin, an ache he didn't understand. His Omega nature, long dormant from the absence of a mate's touch, stirred faintly for the first time in years. He pressed his hand against his chest again, whispering, Why do I still wait for someone who never wanted me? He didn't know that across the palace, Alaric was pacing like a caged beast, fighting his instincts, trembling with a fear he couldn't confess. And the curse whispered to him in the voice of the gods. 10 years you have denied your bond, Alaric Thalos. On the night of the blood moon, your heart shall choose, love or ruin. The palace was drenched in red. Moonlight bled across the marble halls, staining the white stone crimson. The royal banners swayed in the cold wind, and the air itself felt heavy, thick with an energy that made every heartbeat louder, every breath deeper. In his chamber, King Alaric Thalos sat in darkness. He had dismissed his guards, extinguished every torch, and locked the doors. His breathing came slow, measured, yet there was a tremor in his hand, his claws threatening to emerge as the curse burned beneath his skin. The blood moon had risen. He could feel it, the primal rhythm in his veins, the pull toward the one scent that had haunted him for a decade. Lysander's scent. He pressed his palm to the table, cracking the wood beneath his strength. "Stay away from him," he muttered to himself. "If I touch him, the curse will devour him." But the voice inside, the one that sounded too much like the gods, whispered cruelly back, "You already are devouring him. With your absence, with your silence." On the far end of the palace, Lysander sat by his balcony window, staring at the moon. It glowed a deep scarlet, beautiful and ominous. The crimson light brushed across his skin like liquid fire, and he shivered, his omega senses stirring, long suppressed but not forgotten. His pulse quickened. His body was hot, too hot, though the air was cold. The blood moon, his kind's instinctive cycle, was awakening him. He didn't understand it. Why now, after so many years of emptiness? He rose, crossing the room to the carved wooden door that separated his chambers from the king's. They had shared a suite for years, but never shared a bed, nor even a night's conversation in private. And yet tonight, some part of him whispered that Alaric was on the other side. He reached for the handle. His hand trembled. "Your Majesty," he whispered, barely audible. "Are you awake?" Inside, Alaric's head snapped up. That voice, soft, fragile, beautiful, cut through the haze of his restraint like a blade. Lysander. His name escaped the Alpha's lips like a prayer. He could smell him now, the faint sweetness of moonflower and rain, the scent that had driven him mad for 10 years, one he'd tried to bury beneath duty and fear. The air around him shimmered faintly, the curse tightening its invisible chains. His veins glowed faintly red beneath his skin. He staggered toward the door, his breathing ragged. Lysander hesitated on the other side, feeling the faint thrum of energy between the wood. "Alaric?" he called again, quieter this time. "Are you unwell?" A low growl rumbled from the other side, half pain, half longing. "Don't come closer," Alaric managed. His voice was rough like stone grinding. "Go back to your room." But Lysander's heart rebelled. For 10 years he had obeyed every command, swallowed every ache. Not tonight, not under this cursed beautiful moon. He opened the door. The two of them froze. The red moonlight poured through the arched windows, spilling across them both. Lysander in his white robe, silver hair glowing like silk fire, and Alaric, towering, trembling, his golden eyes burning too bright. The air between them pulsed. For the first time in 10 years, the Alpha King looked at his husband, not with distance, but with raw, helpless desire. Lysander took a hesitant step forward. "Alaric, you're shaking." Alaric's hands clenched. His claws dug into his palms until they bled. "I told you to stay away," he growled, voice cracking. Lysander stopped, lips trembling. "Then tell me why," he whispered. "Tell me why you've never touched me, why you flinch whenever I breathe too close. Do you hate me that much?" The words struck Alaric harder than any blade. He stared at him, stricken, the curse's energy writhing around his body like invisible chains. "Hate you?" His voice broke. "Lysander, I've spent 10 years trying not to love you." Lysander froze, eyes wide, heart pounding. The moon outside flared brighter, red light flooding the room. The curse broke through its last thread. Alaric stumbled forward, his control unraveling. The scent of his alpha pheromones filled the air, thick and heady, making Lysander's knees weaken. The king's eyes glowed faintly gold and crimson, and he reached out, then stopped, his hand inches from Lysander's cheek, trembling violently. "I can't," he choked. "If I touch you, the curse will." Lysander stepped closer until their breath mingled. "Then let it," he whispered, tears glimmering, "because this distance has already been killing me." His words broke something inside Alaric. The Alpha shuddered, his entire body trembling as he finally let his hand graze Lysander's cheek, just barely, fingers brushing skin like fire. The curse flared, but instead of consuming, it weakened. The red light around them flickered, shifting to gold. Lysander gasped softly as warmth spread through him, gentle and wild. Alaric's eyes widened in shock. The curse wasn't killing him. It was breaking, the air filled with light, with scent, with a sound like a sigh from the heavens themselves. And then, Alaric fell to his knees before Lysander, shaking, tears streaking down his face for the first time in a decade. "Forgive me," he whispered hoarsely. "Forgive me for every night I made you sleep alone. I can't bear it anymore. I can't not touch you anymore." Lysander knelt, cupping his face with trembling hands. "Then don't hold back," he breathed. "Not tonight." The moon burned bright red and gold above the palace, casting their shadows together on the floor, and Alpha and his long-forgotten mate, the curse finally cracking open between them. And as Alaric leaned forward, his lips brushed Lysander's forehead. Not a claiming, not yet, but a promise. "I swear, I'll never leave you untouched again." The red moon had begun to fade into gold, but the air between them still pulsed with heat. Lysander's fingers lingered on Alaric's face, trembling slightly as he memorized every line he had once only dared to look at from afar. The hard jaw, the faint scar at the corner of his lip, the fire in his golden eyes that was no longer hidden behind armor. Alaric's breath shuddered as their foreheads touched. For a moment, there was no palace, no curse, no crown, only the fragile space between their hearts. "For years I've dreamed of this," Lysander whispered, "and each time I woke, I told myself to stop hoping." "I dreamed of it too," Alaric replied, his voice rough. "But each time I woke, I told myself to stop wanting." The tension in his body trembled like a drawn bowstring. His scent, dark cedar and storm, filled the air around them, and Lysander's omega instincts responded with a soft, unguarded sigh. The sound nearly undid the king. He brushed his thumb over Lysander's lower lip, watching it part. "You don't know how many nights I stood outside this door," he murmured. "How many times I wanted to open it." Lysander's eyes glistened. "Then why didn't you?" Alaric's gaze fell. "Because I thought my touch would kill you. The curse warned me that my blood would destroy the one I loved. So I stayed away. But each year it became harder. Each year I loved you more." Lysander's hand moved to rest over his chest, feeling the thunder of the king's heartbeat. "And still," he whispered, "I waited for you." That broke him. The distance of a decade shattered in one breath as Alaric pulled him into his arms. The warmth of that first embrace was almost painful, a release of 10 years of hunger and restraint. Lysander gasped softly against his chest, clutching the fabric of his robe as if afraid he might vanish. Alaric held him tighter, his hand sliding up to cradle the back of his neck. "You're real," the Alpha murmured against his hair. "You're here. I've always been here," Lysander breathed back, "waiting for you to come home." The room filled with the faint rustle of silk and the soft rhythm of breath. When Alaric lifted his face, Lysander met him halfway, their lips finally meeting in a kiss that was slow, searching, and full of everything they'd been denied. It wasn't desperate at first, it was reverent, the kind of kiss one gives to a prayer finally answered. But when Lysander's fingers slid to the back of Alaric's neck, the Alpha shuddered, and the kiss deepened, heavier, trembling, hungry. The red and gold moonlight poured over them, wrapping them in warmth. Alaric broke the kiss just enough to whisper, "Tell me to stop, and I will." Lysander's voice was a whisper against his lips. "Don't stop." The king's breath caught, his eyes dark with emotion. "You don't know what that means." Lysander looked up at him, eyes shimmering. "Then show me." He smiled faintly, the first true smile in years, and lifted Lysander into his arms as if he were the most fragile treasure in the world. Their foreheads touched again as he whispered, "Tonight, I'll touch you as if it's the first and last time I ever could." The balcony curtains swayed as the moon dipped lower, veiling the scene in shadows. The faint sound of silk against skin, the thrum of two heartbeats, and the gentle murmur of their names filled the quiet. And when dawn came, the curse was silent. Only the golden sunlight remained, streaming across tangled sheets and the peaceful sleeping figure in the Alpha King's arms, the Omega he had finally, after 10 long years, dared to hold. The first rays of dawn spilled over the spires of Thalos. Inside the royal suite, silence reigned, soft and golden. Lysander woke first. For a long time he didn't move. Alaric's arm was still wrapped around him, heavy and protective, his face buried against Lysander's hair. The Alpha King, feared by armies, worshipped by nobles, slept like a man finally unburdened. Lysander traced a careful finger along the scar at Alaric's shoulder, the one that had always made him wonder who had hurt him. Now he understood that some wounds were carved not by swords, but by loneliness. He smiled faintly and whispered, "You're real after all." When Alaric stirred, his first instinct was panic. The curse, the prophecy. He sat upright so quickly that the sheets slid from his shoulders, eyes wild, searching for harm on Lysander's skin. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "Do you feel dizzy? Weak?" Lysander blinked, confused, then shook his head with a small laugh. "No, my king. Only a little sore from your armor." Relief hit Alaric so hard he exhaled shakily, burying his face in his palms. "The curse didn't take you." Lysander tilted his head, gentle. "Maybe love did." The words silenced him. By midday, the palace buzzed. Servants whispered behind pillars. Guards exchanged looks. The scent of the Alpha King's mark lingered faintly in the royal wing, impossible to hide. Lady Maria entered Lysander's chamber with wide eyes and an urgent curtsy. "Your Majesty, the entire court knows. They say the king finally claimed you under the blood moon." Lysander's cheeks warmed. "Let them talk." But outside, it was no small gossip. The High Council convened in haste. An heir meant new politics, new alliances, and perhaps a new war. And beneath the celebration, a shadow still moved. An old curse does not die quietly. That night, Alaric summoned the oracle again. The seer's voice echoed through the candlelight. "You touched him and the curse slept, but it is not gone. The bond must be completed under the next full moon, or your line will pay the price." Alaric's fists clenched. "Then tell me what to do." The oracle's eyes gleamed. "Do not fear love, my king. Fear what happens if you try to cage it again." Back in their chamber, Lysander stood by the window, the wind playing with his silver hair. When Alaric returned, he stopped behind him, hesitant again, as if afraid that the closeness of morning had been a dream. Lysander turned, smiling softly. 10 years you kept your distance," he said. "You don't have to stand so far anymore." Alaric stepped closer, his hand finding his husband's. "Then stay with me, Lysander. Whatever comes next, curse or crown, I won't let go again." Outside, the moonlight was gentle this time. For once, there was no crimson glare, only pale silver peace. Two figures stood hand in hand at the balcony, an Alpha King who had feared to love, and the Omega who had waited long enough to teach him how. A week passed after the blood moon. The palace of Thalos had never felt so alive, or so dangerous. Every noble had a new opinion about the royal bedchamber. Some called it a blessing from the gods. The Alpha King has finally chosen love. Others whispered darker things. The peace treaty will collapse. An heir from the Varen line could divide the throne. Through all of it, Lysander walked the gilded corridors with a serenity that only half hid his anxiety. He had become the eye of a storm he never asked for. In the council hall, Alaric faced his ministers. "I will hear no word against the queen consort," he said, his voice cold as the marble beneath their feet. "If there is to be an heir, it will unite our kingdoms, not destroy them." The ministers bowed, but behind lowered heads, envy flickered. The most powerful alpha alive had been undone by love, and many of them resented the softness in his eyes when he spoke the Omega's name. Later, in the gardens, Lysander met Lady Maria beneath the old moon tree. The petals were falling, white and slow. "You've been pale lately," Maria said softly, touching his arm. "Are you unwell?" Lysander smiled faintly, but his hand drifted to his stomach before he could stop it. A warmth there pulsed like a secret. "I don't know," he admitted. "I feel different." The maid's eyes widened. "The Queen of Thalos carrying an heir." "Shh!" Lysander interrupted, his cheeks flushing. "It's too soon to speak of that." But that night, as he lay beside Alaric and listened to the quiet rhythm of his husband's breathing, he touched that same spot again, and for the first time in years he whispered a prayer. Not for freedom, not for peace, but for life. Days turned into weeks. Every morning, Alaric found new reasons to linger near Lysander. Simple things. Breakfast shared in the garden, letters signed together, walks through the courtyard where soldiers bowed their heads to both rulers now. Their bond had changed the palace. Laughter sometimes echoed where only silence had ruled. And yet, in the quiet hours after midnight, Alaric still dreamed of red chains and a voice whispering from the dark. "Love him too much, and you will lose him still." He would wake sweating, turn to find Lysander sleeping peacefully beside him, and hold him a little tighter, afraid of shadows he could not fight. One evening, as the sky burned orange, a messenger from the eastern border arrived bearing grim news. The Varen loyalists, Lysander's old people, believed the Omega Prince had been bewitched by the Alpha King. They were calling for his return. And the Council of Thalos was divided on whether the king should protect his husband or send him back to avoid war. When Alaric told him, Lysander's voice was calm, but his hands shook. So after 10 years of being nothing, now I am a weapon again. Alaric took his face gently in his hands. You are my bond, not my pawn, he said, steady. Let them call it what they wish. They will not take you from me. Lysander searched his eyes for the old coldness and found none. Then whatever comes, he whispered, we face it together. That night, the moon rose silver over Talos. From the balcony, the wind carried the scent of rain and distant thunder. In Lysander's chest, that small warmth flickered again, a spark that felt alive. And though he did not yet know it, beneath the curse and the politics, the first heartbeat of their future heir had already begun to echo faintly under the moonlight. Thunder rolled across the capital of Thalos. Rain fell on the marble courtyards, washing over banners that now bore two crests joined together, the dragon of Thalos and the moonflower of Varen. Inside the great hall, the council's voices clashed like swords. The Varen delegation demands the queen consort's return. If the Omega bears the king's child, it will create a claim on both thrones. This alliance will not hold. At the head of the table sat King Alaric, silent but burning with fury. He listened until the last voice faltered, then rose from his seat. You forget yourselves, he said, his tone low and dangerous. You speak of my husband. You will not speak his name as if he were a coin to trade. The room fell silent. No one had seen him this way in years. No armor, no mask, only the quiet, terrifying certainty of a ruler who had found something worth losing everything for. While the council argued and plotted, Lysander stayed in the inner garden, the one place untouched by politics. He knelt among the lilies, hands folded over the faint curve of his stomach, feeling that strange, gentle rhythm again. A life, a fragile promise. Do you hear them? He whispered to the rain. They would tear the world apart before letting us simply love. Lady Maria knelt beside him. Then you must make them see, she said softly. Your voice reaches hearts the king's sword cannot. That evening, Alaric returned from the council exhausted. He found Lysander waiting by the hearth, candlelight painting gold along his hair. You defended me again, Lysander said quietly. Always, Alaric replied. He removed his gloves, his crown, everything that weighed on him, and sat beside his husband. For a long time neither spoke. The rain outside softened. Finally, Lysander said, They want me gone. Alaric's jaw tightened. They can't have you. And if it means war? Alaric looked at him then, really looked, seeing not fragility but quiet strength. Then let the world learn that peace built on fear was never peace at all. Lysander's lips parted in surprise, then curved into a faint smile. You've changed. The king reached for his hand. You changed me first. Days later, word spread across both kingdoms. The queen consort of Thalos carries the royal heir. Crowds filled the streets, bells rang, priests declared it an omen of renewal. But in the shadowed corridors of Varen, some called it blasphemy, a sign that their lost prince had been bewitched by the enemy. Whispers turned to blades. Envoys disappeared on the roads. The fragile peace began to crack. In the royal nursery, Lysander stood before the window, watching the horizon darken with storm clouds. Behind him, Alaric placed a hand on his shoulder. If they come for you, Alaric said, they will find me waiting. Lysander turned, resting a hand over his heart. Then promise me this. No matter what happens, protect our child. Let love, not vengeance, rule what we leave behind. The king hesitated, then bent to press his lips to Lysander's forehead. I promise, he whispered. You and our heir are the light I'll follow through any darkness. Outside, lightning flashed over the mountains. The first sign that the storm to test that promise was already gathering. The peace shattered at dawn. A single trumpet echoed from the eastern wall, followed by the clash of steel. The Varen banners, silver moons on black, rose like ghosts against the sunrise. The rebels had crossed the border. Inside the palace, chaos reigned. Servants fled through corridors, soldiers shouted orders, and the scent of smoke crept through the halls. King Alaric stood in full armor again for the first time in years, the cold weight of his sword resting against his side. Yet beneath all his fury, his first thought was not of war strategy. It was of Lysander. He found his husband in the moon hall, standing by the great window where they had once danced. His pale robes fluttered in the wind, and his eyes, those soft silver eyes, were calm even as the world outside burned. You should be with the guards, Alaric said sharply. It's not safe here. And you should not be fighting alone, Lysander replied. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the king crossed the marble floor and drew him into his arms. If they take you, he began. Then they'll take me as their prince, not your captive, Lysander whispered. And I'll find a way back to you. Alaric pressed his forehead to his husband's. No, I've lost you once for 10 years. Never again. But fate had a cruel sense of timing. That very night, under cover of rain, the Varan rebels breached the palace gates. A small detachment broke into the east wing, where Lysander slept, guarded by only 2 knights. They didn't come to kill. They came to steal back their prince. When the king reached the chamber, it was already empty. The window shattered. A trail of moon-pale petals scattered across the floor, Lysander's flower crown torn apart in the struggle. Alaric fell to his knees, clutching the ribbon that had held it together. For the first time since his coronation, the Alpha King of Thalos broke. Bring him back to me, he whispered to no one and everyone. I don't care what it costs. Meanwhile, in the cold mountains of Viren, Lysander awoke in a carriage surrounded by armed men. The leader, a stern-faced general with the old crest of his father's house on his cloak, met his gaze. Your Majesty, the general said, we've come to free you from the Alpha's spell. Lysander's hands tightened around his robe. There is no spell, he said quietly, only love. The men exchanged uneasy glances. To them it was proof the king's curse had indeed bound him to Thalos. And when Lysander looked out at the distant lights of Thalos fading behind him, tears stung his eyes. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that he could feel Alaric's bond pulling faintly in his chest, straining, aching, still alive. Days turned into weeks of captivity. Varan priests tried to purify him with rites and incense, chanting that he was tainted by the Alpha's mark. But every night, when he closed his eyes, he felt Alaric's warmth in his dreams, a voice whispering across the distance, "Hold on, my heart. I'm coming for you." Back in Thalos, Alaric gathered his generals. He ordered no conquests, no burning of villages, only one command: find the Varan encampment, bring the queen consort home. When his advisors protested that a king should not march into enemy territory himself, he silenced them with a single sentence. You forget, the heart of a king is not his throne, it is the one he cannot live without. And so began the War of the Bloodlines, not fought for power or pride, but for love that defied both kingdoms' laws. The snow fell in thick, heavy flakes across the northern mountains. The fortress of Viren stood against the horizon, black stone surrounded by icy winds where no warmth seemed to reach. But that night, fire came for it. King Alaric's army advanced beneath the storm, banners snapping in the wind. The dragon of Thalos glowed red against the white expanse. At the center of the column rode Alaric himself, cloaked in shadow and frost, his sword drawn but his eyes burning with one single vow. I will bring him home, he murmured to the night. Inside the fortress, Lysander knelt in the temple chamber. He had been kept there for days, told by the priests that his child was a curse, told that the Alpha's mark would consume him before the next moon. They had wrapped him in silver chains, not to bind his body, but to sever the bond that tied his soul to the king. But the bond would not break. It pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat beneath his skin. He raised his head as thunder echoed outside. No, not thunder. The sound of battle. His lips trembled. Alaric, the gates of the fortress burst open with a roar. Flames and steel flooded the courtyard. At their head, Alaric cut through the Varan guards like a storm. He did not stop for prisoners or mercy, only for the door that led to the temple. He pushed it open, breathless, soaked with snow and blood, and froze. Lysander was there, kneeling in the circle of candles wrapped in silver chains, his pale robes torn, but his eyes lit the whole chamber. You came, Lysander whispered. Nothing in this world could have stopped me, Alaric said, crossing the room in 2 strides. He slashed through the chains. The moment the last one broke, the candles extinguished, and a wave of silver light burst from the floor, blinding them both. A voice, ancient and cold, echoed through the air. The bond you defied was never meant to be broken. One life must end for the other to remain. The curse of the blood moon, the same spell that had once bound Alaric's line to solitude, had awakened. Lysander staggered, clutching his stomach. Alaric, it's the curse. It's real. Then I'll break it myself, he said fiercely, drawing his sword. But Lysander shook his head, eyes shining with tears. You can't fight magic with steel, only with a promise strong enough to defy it. He reached up, touching Alaric's cheek. Swear to me, whatever happens, let our child live. Let our love end this cycle. No, Alaric said, voice breaking. I will not lose you. I won't choose between you and our child. The ground trembled. The voice spoke again, darker this time. Then both shall perish. Lysander pressed his lips to Alaric's, soft, trembling, and final. Then let it be both of us, together, he whispered. Love is not meant to be survived. It's meant to be shared until the end. Light consumed them. For a moment it felt like falling through stars. Then silence. When Alaric awoke, the storm had passed. Lysander lay in his arms, his body still, his skin faintly glowing under the moonlight. But when Alaric reached for him, the Omega's lashes fluttered, and a single tear slid down his cheek. It's over, Lysander breathed. The curse is gone. The light faded from the temple walls, leaving only the quiet sound of the wind outside. And then, faintly, impossibly, a second heartbeat pulsed between them. Their child's, alive. The war ended with the dawn. Viren's priests bowed before the new light rising from the mountains. They saw the two kings, one Alpha, one Omega, standing hand in hand, the bond between them no longer cursed but sacred. And above them, the first sun in centuries rose clear and red, washing away the shadows of the blood moon forever. Spring came to Thalos for the first time in a decade. The long winter of war and curse had broken, and the valleys that once burned now bloomed with lilies. Peace, real and fragile, rested over both kingdoms. At the heart of the capital, the palace bells tolled softly, not for mourning this time, but for birth. Inside the royal chambers, the air was hushed, glowing with candlelight. Lysander lay surrounded by silks, his silver hair damp against his forehead, his hand gripping Alaric's tightly. The healers moved quietly, reverently, for this was not merely a birth, but a miracle. No Omega Royal had ever survived the curse's legacy before. Outside, nobles and servants waited in the courtyard, watching the moon rise over the tower where the first cry of the air echoed at last. A small, clear sound, soft and perfect. Alaric bowed his head, his forehead against Lysander's hand, trembling. You did it, he whispered. You gave us everything. Lysander smiled faintly through tears. Not everything, he said softly. There's still a future to live for. The nurse approached, cradling a small bundle wrapped in pale silk. Within it, the newborn stirred, silver eyes just like Lysander's, and a single mark over his heart, faint and golden. The mark of both bloodlines, murmured the priest. Blessed by the Alpha Sun and the Omega Moon. When Alaric took the child into his arms, the bond that had once been a curse now pulsed with warmth. Not pain, but life. He turned to Lysander. He looks like you. No, Lysander whispered, smiling. He looks like us. They named him Salem, meaning heaven between two worlds. That night, when the palace finally slept, Alaric carried his husband out to the balcony. The air was cool, and the moon hung full and silver above them. Below, the city shimmered like stars scattered across earth. When I first saw you, Alaric said quietly, I thought you were sent to test me. And now, Lysander asked, leaning against him, now I know you were sent to save me. Lysander laughed softly, eyes shining. You were the one who never stopped trying to love me, even when it hurt. It was never effort, Alaric said, brushing a hand through his hair. It was the only thing that ever felt right. As the moonlight touched them, the bond between Alpha and Omega shimmered faintly, visible only to them. No longer red and cursed, but golden. No longer a chain, but a vow. For 10 years, you were beside me, and I never dared to reach for you, Alaric whispered. And then one night, Lysander murmured, you did. Their fingers entwined, and in that simple gesture was every promise fulfilled. The ending of their pain, the beginning of something endless. Years later, the songs of Thalos would still tell of the Alpha King and his Omega husband, how their love ended a century-old curse, how their child united two kingdoms, and how under the light of the moon, love that waited 10 years finally became eternal. Epilogue. 5 years later, the palace of Thalos gleamed under the morning sun. Children's laughter echoed through the gardens where once only guards had marched. Peace had become ordinary, not a fragile hope, but a living thing that breathed in every blossom and song. At the edge of the royal orchard, a small boy ran barefoot through the grass. Silver hair caught the light, and when he looked up, his eyes were bright gold. Father! Papa! He called, holding up a crown of flowers he'd made himself. Look! I made it for the moon. Alaric, now older and gentler, turned from the garden path. His armor had been replaced long ago by simple linen and a silver ring. He knelt and scooped the boy up with a laugh that came from a place of pure joy. For the moon, then your papa will be jealous, he teased. From beneath the shade of a flowering tree, Lysander smiled, serene as ever, dressed in pale robes embroidered with moonlight thread. "I don't mind sharing the honor," he said softly. "The moon belongs to all who love." He rose and walked toward them, his steps graceful, the air around him calm and fragrant with lilies. The three of them sat together on the grass. Selim played with his crown of flowers, humming softly while his parents watched in quiet peace. Alaric reached over, brushing a strand of silver hair from Lysander's face. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked quietly. "How close we came to losing all this?" Lysander nodded, his hand resting over Alaric's. "Every day. But then I look at him, his gaze drifted to their son, and I remember that love stronger than fear always wins." "You sound like a poet again," Alaric murmured. "You fell in love with a poet," Lysander replied, smiling. "You knew what you were getting into." They both laughed softly, the sound mingling with the wind in the trees. Later, as evening fell, the royal family stood upon the same balcony where once the moon had borne witness to their pain. Now it watched their peace. Selim leaned against the balustrade, eyes wide at the stars. "Papa, will the moon always protect us?" he asked. Lysander knelt beside him. "The moon doesn't protect us, my heart. It reminds us to be gentle, even in darkness." "And the sun?" the child asked, turning to his other father. Alaric rested a hand on his son's shoulder. "The sun reminds us to be strong enough to love that way." The boy's small hand slipped into both of theirs. "Then we have both," he said solemnly. "We're safe." The bells of Thalos rang softly as the last light of day faded. In the distance, the mountains glowed silver with moonlight. Alaric and Lysander stood side by side, their fingers intertwined, their son asleep between them. "For 10 years we were strangers in the same home," Lysander whispered, "and now this home holds our whole world." "No," Alaric said, pressing a kiss to his temple. "You are my whole world." And under the moon that had once cursed them, now a silent witness to their peace, the king and his Omega consort closed their eyes, their love, their bond, and their legacy eternal, the kingdom of sun and moon forever united. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. Kindly comment below. If you loved it, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon for more amazing content. Drop a comment with your favorite moment, and I'll see you in the next one.